Welcome back to another episode of the Goal Line Stand podcast. We are your host, Jackson Caudill. Kobe, how you doing, man?
I'm good, brother. We had another great week of college football. We had a lot of interesting games. I think we got to take a step back and we really got to talk about some teams because it looks like we got a new threat in the East. Not necessarily new, but a team we really need to start talking about. We had a couple upsets out at in the Pac-12. We had a lot of good games going on, but I think we got to kick the show off because we are Georgia Tech fans here. I need to get the first look at what happened with our Yellow Jackets this weekend.
So I have been talking about this on the All Yellow Jackets pod. Now I can just reiterate my thoughts here. So Tech goes up quickly 14-0 on Bowling Green, and then Bowling Green scores 38 unanswered points. Georgia Tech could not stop them on third down. The Falcons were 10 of 17 on third down. Connor Bazelak, former Missouri and Indiana legend. He didn't just play at Missouri. He was at Indiana as well. Balled out like 21 of 32. He threw for like nearly 280. The run defense was once again very poor. The tackling was dreadful. The running game couldn't get going against one of the worst run defenses in the country. And it was just another embarrassing result in a line of them. Pretty much, you can go back to when Jeff Collins took over. They lost to the Citadel. They have lost to Northern Illinois at home. They put 2 points up in a loss to Temple, like 2 points. They got crushed 73-7 against Clemson one year at home. I believe it was at home. And I mean, now you lose to Bowling Green. The point I've really tried to make is I was never going to judge Brent Key on if he could beat or really compete with Georgia, Clemson. I really didn't know what Miami would be at the beginning of the year, but teams like that, and this is not like I'm saying fire Brent Key. I'm just saying you got to be able to win these games, man. And you absolutely have to be able to win the games you're supposed to win because you're driving yourself further into irrelevancy. Like, I don't really know another way to say it. Like, when you lose games like that, nobody takes you seriously. If you lost – losing to Boston College or Virginia would have been more acceptable than this. Like, you're supposed to win these games. You're in a little bit of a rebuild and transition year, but you're a 23-point home favorite. Like, you have had one of the best offenses in the ACC up to this point. Obviously, they made some changes. Andrew Thacker is now safeties coach. Kevin Scher, who has experience he did coach at Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee with the New York Giants for a little bit. Again, I've said this, I've tweeted it, I've wrote about it. I don't know that this materially makes a difference because, quite truthfully, and no disrespect to anybody, the linebackers have been pretty bad this year. I don't know that all of a sudden, I guess it was something you had to do because the defense has been so poor. But I don't know that materially it's going to make a big difference. And I'm very interested to see how they get off the mat and play this week because it can go one of two ways. They can still show some fight. Louisville's a good team. They're undefeated. They're ranked. They very clearly should beat them. It was a 7-point game against Ole Miss heading into the fourth quarter, or in the fourth quarter, I should say. And their defense played really well against Wake. Can you be that team that showed a lot of fight through those first few weeks? That, you're a little undermanned at some spots. You're not the most talented team on the field every week, but you're going to come out and play hard? Or are they going to lie down? Like that, this Saturday could really show where this season is headed because if they come out and lie down, they're going to get skull drugged. Like Miami's probably going to be out for blood. They have games against North Carolina and Clemson coming up in the next 2 weeks. They're going to try to get that game over with. And look, I saw a stat earlier, when I was, getting ready to preview this game. Miami, 18th in the country in rushing success rate. Georgia Tech is 128th in rushing success rate allowed.
And that's what I was going to get at. I mean, there's a clear correlation. Bowling Green had the ball 25 more minutes of possession than Georgia Tech. Meanwhile, Georgia Tech only had 69 yards rushing. That's unacceptable. Yeah. And then you add on 3 turnovers to go with that, including a pick 6. That was the sloppiest performance we've seen from this offense, which his offense has looked decent all year. It's been vastly improved compared to last year.
I'd say it's looked like legitimately good. Like it's been better than decent. Like it's been legitimately good. Now it's not perfect. Like the running game has struggled off and on really for the past 2 games. Like it's not been very good. They had some moments against Ole Miss, but against Wake and especially last Saturday against Bowling Green, they've not been able to do that. You got to run the ball on Bowling Green. You have to be able to run Bowling Green. Like you should like. Obviously, Haynes King has been pretty good this year. The passing attack's been good. Again, in games like this where you're 3 touchdown favorites, you don't want to be throwing the ball 37 times, nearly 40 times. That's not the recipe. That's not what you want. Like it's a step back for this program. I think a bowl game is probably not going to happen at this point. They could.
You gotta get an upset against North Carolina, Clemson, Miami, Georgia. Maybe you pull it out at Syracuse. I mean, I don't know how.
See, if they beat Virginia, Boston College, and Syracuse, that's at 5.
That's
because before the season, I had them winning those games plus Bowling Green, getting to 6-6. That's a good season. Like that's a good first season. I'm interested to see how they play the rest of the year because it could determine the rest of Brent Key's tenure. Like he has to be able to show the ability for this team to get up and play hard, or it could be bad times in Atlanta. But that's my take on that game. Go read allyellowjackets.com for more. We're going to get to a game that
the most high-level college football game we've seen in a long time. Like celebrities out the wazoo for this game. And it didn't disappoint either, to say
no, it was – so I'll start by saying this. I'm once again going back to 2022, Jackson, and my attitude towards USC. This team cannot win a national title. That's my takeaway from this game. I could be proven wrong. It was just watching Oregon play Colorado and watching USC Colorado. It felt like I was watching just 2 very different things. Like it was, but I'll also say this: it was 30. I think it was 41-14. Do you think USC just let their foot off the gas and didn't care, which is concerning in itself, or do you just think it was straight up bad by USC to let them back in that game?
I mean, Colorado, they didn't score a single point in the first quarter. USC didn't score a single point in the fourth quarter. It's clear that Colorado came out slow. I do think USC took their foot off the gas, but either way, they went touchdown for touchdown in the third quarter of the game. But with Colorado, you have to give credit where credit is due. Colorado has a good defense or a good offense. Defense has different conversation. They have a good offense. I do think Oregon might just be that good. And I think they had all the momentum going into that game. But with a team like USC, they have defensive struggles. But their defensive front, they showed me a couple flashes here and there that they could be what they need to be. You got guys in the back end like Damani Jackson for USC. You got a couple of good corners. But I do think they took the foot off the pedal a little bit. Mm-hmm. But with that being said, you can't do that against an offense like Colorado because they got talent all across the board at the skill positions. I mean, Omarion Miller,
great game.
Dude's a stud. You still got Joe Horn Jr. He's still good. You got the tight end Harrison. He's good. And then the running game looked decent. And Shedeur Sanders showed his legs a little bit. I'm pretty sure he had a rushing touchdown in the game. But with USC, like you said, that defense is going to make or break this team.
Like, does it not just look like every Lincoln Riley team ever?
Yes, very reminiscent.
This isn't like a hating Lincoln Riley thing, but okay, he is supposed to be one of the very, very best coaches in the sport, and like we're going to judge you by those standards. Like, dude, I just can't take them seriously. And the thing is, I hate to see it honestly for them because Caleb Williams is one of the best college quarterbacks I've ever seen.
Yeah,
like he is incredible. Like 30 for 40, over 400 yards passing and 6 touchdowns.
Yeah,
he did
have a stable of receivers too.
Their receivers are so good. And the thing is, Zachariah Branch didn't play. Like
that's crazy.
Think about that. The one thing that's concerning to me, or a couple things, just in a list of them. Colorado ran for 190 something yards, I believe. They were averaging 50 going into the game. Yep. They basically had abandoned the run game, especially against Oregon and some of these other teams, because they basically could. They didn't even run on TCU, who is not good defensively either. Mm-hmm. That is very concerning to me. The fact USC didn't dominate on the ground like I thought they would. Like the first couple drives, Marshawn Lloyd was busting some big runs, breaking tackles, and I'm like, all right, this is just going to be Oregon part 2. They couldn't really run the ball the rest of the game, which I would find concerning if I'm a USC fan.
Yeah.
So I'll say this: I'm not going totally in the tank here because I do think there's a possibility USC got up and didn't care, which is concerning. But there's just too many warning signs that this is just another. When you play Oregon, Washington, UCLA, like you're gonna have to play better.
Yeah.
And if Cam Rising is back, that's going to be more trouble for USC. Now we'll get to Utah in a little bit, but I'm not scared of them if Cam Rising doesn't play. But if he does, like that would worry me if I'm USC.
Well, not even Utah. I think Notre Dame's
Notre
offense
Dame.
could score on this defense. Washington, obviously,
Washington,
and then you still have Oregon. I mean, this USC, like Colorado is a good offense. Do not get me wrong, but you're going to play just as good, if not better, offenses throughout the rest of the season. USC defense, they got to step up, and it's very reminiscent of Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma. I mean, look at the Kyler Murray teams, the Baker Mayfield teams, even the Jalen Hurts one year. It looks like the exact same. You got an offense that can score 50 at will, but you have a defense that's going to give up at least 30, 35 points a game. I mean, you can't win a national championship like that.
Yeah, and it's just disappointing to see. And look, that maybe they get better. Look, they face Arizona this weekend. Maybe they're just waiting to throw the kitchen sink because the back half of the schedule's tough. Like we said at the beginning of the year, USC should be 6-0 heading into the Notre Dame game. You got Notre Dame, you got Utah, Oregon, Washington, and UCLA. I don't consider Cal in there. Like you got to, they have got to find a way to get some stops, or it's going to be 10-2 and Holiday Bowl for them. So moving on to the SEC, to the other coast of the country, we got to talk about.
We got to have some conversations about this game.
Yeah, we do. So I'll start by saying this. I told you pre-show. I know a lot of the talk, and we said this at the beginning of the year. There was going to be Mike Bobo stuff as soon as they start struggling. I honestly don't think the Georgia offense played all that bad. Like Brock Bowers is clearly, a capital D dude. Like, something we've known. Just took over the game completely. I think we both agree if they don't have him, they might not win that game.
Yeah.
But there's just some concerning things for Georgia right now. And again, I'm judging Georgia based on the standards that they have set. Like this is their standard now. They were one of the best teams I've ever seen last year in running their way to the national title. They were very good in 2021. This team is not as good. Now, I'm still kind of wondering do you think there's a gear they can hit, or is this just who Georgia is this year?
I think this is just who Georgia is this year. I mean, it kind of concerns me that they only had 107 rushing yards against Auburn. And Georgia, we've known them to be for years a running back still by committee, even though you had a little bit bigger names there. You're supposed to have the most physical, dominant offensive line, and they still only had 100 rushing yards. If Auburn has any sort of passing game, they win this game, and that kind of scares me. It's not necessarily on Georgia's offense. I just don't think this Georgia defense is what we need it to be for them to three-peat. That's going to be hard to do in itself, but this defense is not really helping them. We talked about it a little bit last week, but they don't have an inside guy like a Jalen Carter or Jordan Davis anymore. And even at the linebacker spot, they don't have a Nakobe Dean or a Nolan Smith back there. You got to have a really good defense to win national championships, and that's what they've had these last couple of years. This year, for the first time, and I said it pre-show, for the first time in what feels like forever, I can't remember the last time I've said this secondary looks like the best part of the Georgia defense, and that kind of scares me.
Go back to the preseason pod, and we both agreed Georgia was really good, and we challenged ourselves, if we're going to nitpick, where are we nitpicking at? And we both said Mike Bobo, who I don't think he's been as good as Monken, but I think he's been fine this year. I don't think he's been a disaster or anything. We talked about the lack of a dominant star on the defensive front, whether it's a pass rusher or defensive lineman, and they don't have a great ground game. And their passing game is not elite enough to where you can just offset the running game, because I think you can do that with some offenses. Like, I don't think Washington has a dominant ground game. I don't care. Like, they're so great through the air, like it just doesn't matter to me. Georgia's not like that. And I'll say this: I think Carson Beck played pretty well Saturday. I thought he played pretty well. I thought
I'm gonna say this, and this might just be me nitpicking. Brock Bowers is that passing attack.
Sure.
I mean, he only had one other guy reach 5 targets in the game, and it was Ladd McConkey. He didn't even get maybe 40 yards, 43 yards, something like that. Brock Bowers is that passing game. I give that game strictly to Brock Bowers. I mean, he's just that dude, and rightfully so. I think he could be a top 5, if not maybe top 3 draft pick this coming year. But with that being said, you don't have a premier guy in the running back room, I don't think. You don't have a premier guy at the wide receiver position. You have Brock Bowers, but I don't think that's going to be enough offensively for you to three-peat.
I'll say this: I basically treat Brock Bowers as a receiver. Like I don't treat him like a normal tight end to me. Like it's kind of like how I treated Kyle Pitts. Like
it's a Kyle Pitts effect, yeah.
Yeah, I just don't see you as a normal tight end. But yeah, the offense, like another thing that, and it sounds like we're just all down on Georgia. Like again, they won. They still are very capable of winning the title this year. Like
on paper they should easily be in the national championship.
Yeah, I just think when you're playing a team that knows they can't throw the ball, like Auburn will basically tell you they can't throw the ball,
so one-dimensional,
and then they still run for 200 plus on you and hit explosive runs. Like that's something to keep an eye on. Like it's and you're gonna. I'm interested to see how they play against Kentucky this weekend. Do I think Georgia wins? Probably. Like I don't see Kentucky walking into Athens with Devin Leary and winning. Kentucky's going to run the ball. Like they are going to run the football. That's what they do. And if they have any level of success, it could be a little like last week. You could be entering the fourth quarter. Maybe it's a little closer than you feel like. So it's something to keep an eye on. But also, like, honestly, Hugh Freeze deserves a lot of credit for getting a game plan.
Very much so.
Like when you're that hamstrung at the quarterback and wide receiver position like they are, and going against somebody as talented on paper as Georgia is. This game I really thought was going to be like 31-6. I just didn't see how Auburn was going to score it all. Credit to them. Like they put together a game plan that almost worked.
I've never been a fan of like the little 2 quarterback system, but Hugh Freeze did it with a little bit of grace and excellence, if we're being honest with you.
Like they have to. Like but they're going out to what they have to do.
I guess my last note on the game, this might just be me speaking as an Alabama fan. I see Peyton Thorne have 92 yards rushing on over 7.5 yards per carry. That gives me hope if I got Jalen Milroe at quarterback. It really does.
Yeah. Against Georgia, yeah. Like, and it's also just the way Georgia's just played around. Like the 2 teams Georgia has played down to are nowhere near as good as Alabama is. So we'll see. But we don't even know if we're getting that game because who knows? Maybe Alabama doesn't win the West.
Hey, don't you manifest that. Don't do that to me.
Speaking of the SEC West, we had an absolutely off-the-rail games on Saturday night, one that was just absolutely incredible. And I have to eat my words. Like I was incredibly wrong on LSU. I thought maybe after the Florida State game that, okay, Florida State's just elite offensively. Like LSU will get it together. It'll be fine. Man, LSU, I don't know what they're going to do the rest of the year, but I can tell you this, their defense is horrendous. And we talked about it before the show. I think the only other LSU defense I can remember being remotely this bad was the COVID year. They were really bad then. I don't know if you remember that first game I had against Mississippi State that year where KJ Costello threw for like 600 yards.
Yeah,
that was the last LSU.
Like that was the epitome of an air raid Mississippi State Mike Leach offense.
Yeah, and I remember after the game there was a lot of, man, KJ Costello's got to be the Heisman frontrunner now. He just dominated an LSU defense. As it turns out, he got benched later that year, by the way. LSU's defense is just and that's just how I feel about this. Like, I give a lot of credit to Ole Miss. Like, maybe I should have seen this coming. Like, LSU's defense didn't play well against Arkansas. Lane Kiffin, all the criticisms I have of him, he's a very good offensive coach and play caller. I should have known he was going to dial some stuff up against this LSU defense, and he did. Some of it was just poor tackling. Like, Ole Miss hasn't been able to run the ball. They couldn't run the ball with their running backs against a lot of teams this year. I know because against Georgia Tech, they had to rely on Jackson Dart to break some big runs. Like, Judkins didn't really do much in that game, but he had his best game of the season.
Yep.
Ole Miss, give them credit. They got up off the mat after kind of an embarrassing performance against Alabama after all the talk and hype and going into that game, and they won.
I think it's more of a testament. And I love Lane Kiffin. I love the way he coaches. I love his offensive schemes. I think this is just more of a testament of how bad LSU is defensively. Like, we talked so much hype about Harold Perkins going into this year. He's having such a quiet season and is so underwhelming. And I hate it because I know the kid has talent. Like, we've seen it. They're not using him the right way. I don't think they're running this defense the right way. And it's kind of concerning. It makes me question what Brian Kelly has going on because he can recruit. He's got guys there. It's not like he doesn't. But what's the deal? You're giving up 55 to Ole Miss, and they looked horrendous against Bama. Now, is Bama's defense that good? Some might say so, but they only gave up, 10 points to Ole Miss, and then Ole Miss bounces back and scores 55. I think LSU's defense is just that bad. Now, I take back everything I've said about Jaden Daniels. I think he has progressed, and he had a fantastic game, and I think he's playing so much better this season compared to last season. But clearly, that's not going to be enough for LSU, especially if you want to win the West again. You can't have a defensive performance like that. I mean, you had a running game. You had your running back go over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jaden Daniels, he had 99 yards and a touchdown. Jaden Daniels also threw for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns, no picks. That was as good as an offense performance as you could possibly have, but the defense never once came through. And then that's how you end up losing to a team like Ole Miss that has an offensive genius on their side of the ball.
I was getting ready to text you Saturday night, and I was going to be like, what'd you say about these LSU receivers again? Because Malik Neighbors has absolutely blistered everybody since that Florida State game. Brian Thomas, he's playing great. They're actually playing up to their talent level, but I can't because they're not winning and they can't stop anybody. I'll say this, this is very similar to how last year played out in a weird way. In a different but sort of similar way. They lost to Florida State, although in a different fashion. Remember, they got boat raced by Tennessee last year, early in the year, and then they wound up running the table the rest of the way and getting to Atlanta. Or they did lose to A&M, but they come close. You are in a
against a very bad A&M team. Yes, they came close.
Best 5-7 team ever. But yeah, so you are in a similar boat because technically LSU still can win the West, but what faith do you have in that? I'll say I'm interested to see how they bounce back this week because Missouri very much can win this game Saturday. I think.
Yes,
it's in Columbia. Yes. It's not Baton Rouge,
and that's a conversation we're going to have whenever we talk about Missouri on this pod. They could very well beat LSU, and nobody would have ever thought that going into this year.
I think some of Ole Miss receivers are very mid. Luther Burden is not. Luther Burden is playing as well as any receiver not named Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yes,
he is very, very good. And I do think Eli Drinkwitz is a very good play caller. So if maybe LSU can get up, play to their talent level, we haven't seen it this year. And they should not be ranked, by the way. Why are they ranked? They're number 23, I think. They beat Grambling, Mississippi State, and Arkansas. Yeah. They got blown out once, and they lost. Why are they ranked?
I mean,
why are they ranked?
That is a question. Why are they ranked over Kentucky right now?
Kentucky's ranked.
They're ranked now. I'm talking about after this season. I'm talking about going into this game. I mean, look at Kentucky. Look at LSU. What has LSU done that Kentucky hasn't up at this point?
It's dumb. Them being ranked is just a disaster to me. But final game before we get to our conference breakdowns. What was actually kind of a slow game to start out, become a pretty thrilling game at the end of it. Notre Dame, they had their backs up against the wall, go down 14-13. And I really thought Duke was about to pull that thing out after not looking good for 2.5 quarters. 4th and 16. Give a lot of credit. Sam Hartman got it on his legs, man. He really did. A couple things here. When they face a good defense, Notre Dame's offense is going into a shell. They've not been able to do anything. And Duke's defense, it's good, but it's not as good as Ohio State's. And they've not been able to consistently. Like they came out firing and looked pretty good. The running game just kind of Sam Hartman was okay in this game. And also, like, I hate seeing Riley Leonard get hurt. Like that sucks. He's going to be out multiple weeks, according to a lot of reports. They do have a bye this week, so maybe that should help. But they still got the rest of their conference schedule ahead of them. They look like an ACC contender. It's only if he's on the field. Like, he kind of is their team. Their defense is good, but he's their entire offense. So hopefully he gets back. But that was just a pretty good, well-played football game between two pretty good teams.
I mean, yeah, I think that's all that was. You had two fairly ranked teams. I mean, Notre Dame was 11, Nuke was 17 going into this week. You had two good teams. You knew they were going to try to run the ball. I mean, Notre Dame has one of, if not top 3 best running backs in the country. I was kind of disappointed, though, by Sam Hartman's performance. I don't think he performed what I thought he would, and maybe that's just due to Duke's defense or what, but I don't know. Notre Dame, I
don't think their receivers are good.
No, they don't have a receiving weapon like that, but also it's Notre Dame. I mean, we got to take it for what it is. They're not going to recruit all that well. It is a hard place to recruit at. You know that better than anybody. It's a hard place to recruit. It's hard to get guys in there. It's hard to get guys to meet that academic standard that they have. So you got to take Notre Dame for what it is. They're going to play hard-nosed, smash-mouth football, and I honestly think that's how Marcus Freeman wants it. I mean, he's a defensive guy. He wants the offense to manage the game, keep the ball on the ground, let your defense go to work. I think that's just who Notre Dame is at this point.
I think they lose a couple more games. Like
that, I agree.
Like USC's defense, if they completely don't show up, they could run all over USC maybe. But if USC gets some stops, like the Notre Dame defense has been pretty good, but yeah. I don't think Notre Dame beats Clemson right now. Truthfully, like I really don't.
I must be on the fence about that one just because I don't trust Clemson at this point.
Fair enough. I'll be interested to see how Notre Dame plays against Louisville this weekend because we'll get to them in just a minute. But yeah, like I said, I hate it for Duke because I hope Riley Leonard's doesn't miss a ton of games. But man, tough loss for them. That was probably their biggest game, maybe ever, possibly. And they come up just short, but. I guess let's go conference by conference like we always do. And I guess let's start in the ACC. They had a game Friday night that was kind of gross. Louisville and NC State. Louisville 13-10. Look, the end result is they are 5-0. We've talked ad nauseum about their schedule. It's not great. And even if they lose to Notre Dame, they still have that's not an ACC loss. Like that, they still have a favorable path to get there. They may be fortunate and not have to play Duke with Riley Leonard. They have to go to Miami later this year. They just beat one of the better teams they're going to play the rest of the year, especially if Riley Leonard's out. So I don't know that Louisville's all that good, but they found a way. Also, Brennan Armstrong hit the bench.
The question I have about Louisville, I mean, I think – do you see them losing – each of these three? Actually, let me rephrase it. Do you see them winning any of these 3 games? You have Notre Dame, you have Miami, you have Kentucky. Do you see them winning any of those 3?
Not right now.
I don't either. I mean, this offense, we didn't have high expectations for the offense. We just had high expectations for the schedule. But granted, they're undefeated right now. Let them cook as long as they can. I think Notre Dame, that could be a game where Sam Hartman tries to bounce back and put on an electric performance. But depending on how they play against Notre Dame, I don't know how much faith I have in Louisville for the rest of the season.
Okay, here's the thing. If they lose all 3 of those games and go 9-3, they're probably in the ACC title because 2 of those games are non-conference. Think about it. Like they could still be in there. If their only loss is to Miami, it'll be interesting to see how everything plays out. But, if they play Duke without Riley Leonard, like, Miami's the only ACC team on the schedule. I'm like, they're probably not beating them in Miami, especially the way Miami's playing right now. And we'll wait and see on them. They got North Carolina and Clemson in a couple of weeks. So, how bad is Pitt? Do we need to we don't have enough time today to discuss where this program's at. But man, 2 years ago they won the ACC with Kenny Pickett, and Pat Narduzzi doesn't want to play that kind of – he don't want to throw the ball around and look good anymore. He wants to play that kind of style of football. They lost by 17 to Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech has not been good at all this year.
Not at all.
Man, there's a debate. Like, they could be the worst team in the ACC right now. Them, Virginia, Boston College. I guess you got to throw Georgia Tech in there now when you lose Bowling Green. That's where you get put. So
I don't know. It's bad. You had a quarterback that only completed – like, Djokovic only, completed 50% of his passes, if that, and then you only finished with 38 rushing yards on the game.
Yeah.
Pitt is the worst team in the ACC. Like, I'm willing to stamp that. It's bad.
I don't have anything more to say to it. It's just crazy. 2 years ago, they won that. And even last year, their offense wasn't great last year, but they won 9 games. Like that. Yeah. And Pat Narduzzi kind of trashing Keaton Slovis on his way out of there too. Like look at you now. Anything else in the at Boston College? Like they beat Virginia.
I mean, they pick your poison at that point.
They're underdogs for me, by the way. I didn't know if you knew that.
Do you think Clemson was on cruise control against Syracuse? I mean, they still won 31-14, but Cade Klubnik,
in my mind, they were going to win that game.
No, never. But Cade Klubnik, he didn't look very efficient. The running game didn't really look very efficient. I don't know. I just don't know what to do with Clemson right now. They're just
they're gonna wait and see in a couple weeks when they play Miami. Like they're gonna roll Wake Forest this weekend. I don't know who they play next weekend, but that's where you'll see it. Okay, is Clemson just really good against these other teams, not good against good teams? Like I still think on paper, like I would take them over a lot of teams because
they
should have beat Florida State. The loss to Duke was a bit fluke. Like they got in the red zone, missed chip shot field goals and turned the ball over. Like that's not like they got unlucky in a lot of ways. And look, I'm not at all taking anything away from Duke. I'm just saying you play that game again. Duke could win, but it plays out probably differently. Like I'm still waiting to see with Clemson, but they handled business. I was surprised they were only 7-point favorites against Syracuse. Like Syracuse was really banged up heading into that game. And they're going to be banged up the rest of the year. And now they got to play North Carolina and Florida State. Like they're probably going to be 4-3 at the end of that stretch, I would imagine. So we'll see on Syracuse. But other than that, Boston College is an underdog at Army, by the way, this weekend. Just passing that along.
Oh, God, Boston College.
Big Ten time. Let's start off with this. Michigan decimated Nebraska. They kind of look like they finally showed up a little bit in how we thought they would.
We were just talking about that last week. Like they were on cruise control, just barely gliding by the teams they're supposed to beat. They laid the smackdown on Nebraska.
And look, Nebraska sucks. Like they're bad, but you dominated a bad team the way you should have. I thought the run game looked a little bit better than what it has earlier in the year. J.J. McCarthy played pretty. This defense is nasty. Like this, I have a hot take here. This might be the best defense of the Jim Harbaugh era. I think it's pretty good. The past couple years have been good. That one they had in 2016 with Rashawn Gary and Jabril Peppers was pretty good. This defense, I think, is very, very good. And the thing I hate about Michigan is their schedule. It's so terrible. Like until they play Penn State in the third to last week of the season, it's not till week 10 or week 11 that they play Penn State. You're going to find out anything like whether they're as good as they could be or not. Like that. That's the frustrating thing about Michigan is I'd like to talk about how good they look, but you got to throw out. Well, they ain't played nobody really, so I don't know if you got any other thoughts on the Wolverines, but
I mean, it was good to see. They had 0 penalties, they had 0 turnovers. I mean, I like to see that kind of stuff whenever you play games against lesser opponents. I like to see efficient football, but it's like you said, until they actually play somebody, we're not going to know how good this team really is. But we talked about it last week. They must have listened to the pod. They've just been cruising past the games that we thought they would blow out. They finally laid the smackdown on somebody, and that's always good to see.
Yep. Were you at all worried about Penn State Saturday? 10-10 at halftime. Not really, but it was kind of like, why are y'all doing this?
Not at all. I mean, that's the nature of the beast, man. It's every given Saturday. We've seen dominant teams in the past do that. You're playing lesser opponents, you play down to their level a little bit, and then sure enough, in the second half of the game, let's see, they scored 17 points in the third quarter, scored 14 points in the fourth quarter, and they only gave up a field goal in the second half of the game. I mean,
what was a crazy stat to me about this game? I think it was when Northwestern took the lead for just a brief second. They were in negative yards of rushing. Like they didn't have any like positive yards rushing. And I was just like, man, can Penn State's offense please get going? That's one thing. They've started off slow a couple times this year. Where if you do that against Michigan and Ohio State, you're going to get beat. But
yeah,
I still believe Penn State is the best team in the Big Ten. I'm sticking with that. But they got to be able to start faster.
Also, does it concern you that Northwestern sacked the quarterback 7 times?
Yes. Penn State's offensive line, for whatever reason, this year has not played anywhere near as good as it did last year. And they didn't lose anybody is the crazy thing.
Yeah.
The run game has just been okay, and the offensive line play has just been okay. The defense has been I still think Alabama has the best defense in the country, but Penn State, to me, is right behind them. I would put Penn State above Georgia now after watching that Auburn game Saturday, truthfully. I still think it's really good, but yeah, their offense just has some things to work out. And look, they get a bye week this week. You get UMass the next week, and then you go to Columbus. That is the measuring stick that we'll see. So I'm interested to see that.
Yep.
Illinois. Talk about a team that's taking a massive step back, man.
Yeah, it's pitiful over there.
44-19 against Purdue. Lord, and Purdue's not good, by the way. Maryland handled business. They've not played anybody this year.
We need to have a conversation about them, though.
In terms of
I don't think that they're getting enough credit. I mean, granted, like you said, they haven't really played anybody. But with that being said, they're playing efficiently on offense. They're moving the ball up and down the field at will. I'm not saying they're going to beat Ohio State by any stretch, but I honestly think they can move the ball up and down the field on Ohio State.
You like them to cover?
I like them to cover. I like them to cover that spread.
I guess I'm interested to see about their defense. We were talking about this pre-show. So you look at the quarterbacks they played. Indiana is really bad offensively. Charlotte is not good. Virginia's terrible on offense. They've played some pretty pitiful
Michigan
offense.
State is not good. Townsend, Charlotte. I mean, so on and so forth.
That's the thing. Like it's look, and they should be ranked. Why is LSU ranked over Maryland? I got no idea. And this is exactly what Maryland fans should want to see. In a division, in a Big Ten with divisions, in the division they're in, it's hard to compete with Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, having to play them every year.
Yeah.
This is a good team, and like you're taking care of the opponents you should be, and everybody else. We'll see, if they're just a decent Big Ten team, or maybe they're better. I don't know.
I'm interested to see how that offensive line holds up against Ohio State's D line. I'm very interested to see how that goes.
Just other scores. Rutgers beat a terrible FCS team in Wagner, and I guess credit where it's due. Iowa beat a Michigan State team that's probably quit this year. They scored on special teams and defense. Their offense did not score 26 points.
No, I went and saw, and their quarterback he went 11 for 27 with 115 yards. That's typical Iowa, dude.
4-1, man. 4-1. The sad thing is, if they beat Wisconsin in a couple weeks, they're winning that division.
Yeah.
And it's going to be – you saw what they did against Penn State. If they get to the Big Ten title game, it's going to be – just last point on the Big Ten, just as a whole thing while we got a couple minutes here. How big is the gap? Because I think it's really big. After Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State, how big is the gap between the next best team in the Big Ten?
Well, who do you think is the next best team in the Big Ten? I think it's Maryland, yeah.
I think Maryland.
I'll ask me that after this Saturday, after Maryland plays Ohio State, and I'll be able to answer that for you.
Look, okay, here's the thing. Are you really going to judge them based on how they play against Ohio State? I guess you should, maybe.
Yes, because that's the only good team they've faced all year. I mean, granted, when I say good team, this is a top 5 team in the country, but still, this is going to be the best team they play up to this point. And I like them to move the ball up and down the field. I like them to cover the spread against Ohio State. It really just
Wisconsin.
Yeah. I mean, I like them. I think it might. Honestly, how would you feel about this if it's Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, gap, Maryland, gap, everybody else?
See, Maryland and Wisconsin are the same thing to me. Like
Okay.
I put them there, and then there to me there's a gap. And sad thing is Iowa might be next in line, which is just sure.
Freaking Iowa, man.
Let's move to the Big 12. We got to start off by the highest ranked team, Texas. Look, I get Jalen Daniels didn't play. That wouldn't have mattered. They come out. That game should have been worse than 40-14. Like, if you look at the yard discrepancy there, Texas had over 600 yards. Kansas, they were somewhere in the 200s. Like, they absolutely dominated this game. Baxter had over 200 yards rushing. It was just Brooks. Yeah, he was very good. I mean, Texas is taking care of business against the teams that they need to, like we've wanted to see. And now probably your last big test of the year is what's the crazy thing is against Oklahoma. Like, you're going to be 2 to 3 touchdown favorites the rest of the way. If you beat them, maybe you get a rematch with Oklahoma in the Big 12 title game. It's a big week for Texas, but they look very, very good.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to stand on it. We talked a little bit about last week. Right now, Texas looks like the best team in the country, and now they found a balance with their running game. They look really, really good, and honestly, they've done nothing but impress me even more since the Bama game. I think their passing attack is elite. I love what Quinn Ewers is doing. You got A.D. Mitchell and Xavier Worthy. Don't need to go into any more detail with that, but this running game has really impressed me. You found balance with Brooks. I still think Baxter is a phenomenal running back. This defense, I mean, you held Kansas to only 14 points, which they were without their starting quarterback. I just think Texas is that good. And we talked about last week with Washington. Washington's playing just as good as anybody. I think they're really taking that next step.
Yep. That game's gonna be so much fun Saturday.
Imagine going into the season, we'd be talking about Texas and Washington being the two best teams in the country.
And the funny thing, they played in a bowl game last year. They played in a bowl game last year, and Washington won. So maybe. Yeah. But yeah, those two are clearly. I'll still stand on. I'm not going to back off just because of one game. I still would take Washington over anybody at this moment. But we're not going to see Washington for a couple weeks because they play Oregon. But we'll get to the Pac-12 in just a little bit. But yeah, just great performance for Texas. Did you see Baylor UCF?
As soon as I turned the TV to that game, UCF's quarterback is running 60 yards backwards and still delivers a first down dot. I don't know how in the world that happened, but it was fun to see. I mean, you had a 36-35 game. I think that's huge kudos to Gus Malzahn and UCF, but Baylor barely made it out. And I still have a lot of questions about Baylor.
Sure, but they come back from 26 points down in the third quarter. Like that,
yes.
That's what's insane about that game.
It's also UCF though.
Sure, but like at the way Baylor's season has gone, you got to tip your cap a little bit. Like Blake Shapen came back, played.
I mean, 26 points in the fourth quarter. I mean,
it's crazy. Rough. Man, Houston had a golden opportunity to beat Texas Tech when Texas Tech's got some injuries. Dana Holgorsen, I don't think he's lasting long out there, to be truthful. Oklahoma, Iowa State scored 20 points in the first quarter, and I was thinking, man, Oklahoma, are y'all going to blow this right before the Texas game? Iowa State didn't score the rest of the game, so they handled their business. Oklahoma, we have been holding out on because they probably played a worse schedule than Maryland up to this point. This is Brent Venables' time to show that this program's a lot better than how it's been. In a big step up from last year. I'm very, very excited to see that game this weekend. Is West Virginia the third best team in the Big 12? I can't believe that's coming out of my mouth, but you need to consider it probably. They're 4-1. They're not winning pretty by any stretch. They beat TCU. Kansas just lost. Kansas State probably, but like West Virginia might be top 5.
I think Kansas and Kansas State are still better than West Virginia.
Okay, they're still top 5 then because that's okay. Texas, Oklahoma,
Texas,
Kansas State, Kansas. They just beat TCU. They're better. I think they're better than Baylor, UCF, Houston, BYU, Cincinnati.
It just kills me to sit there and think a top 5 team in the conference is top 5, and they're getting wins with a quarterback that threw 10 for 21 and 142 yards and no touchdowns. Like, that's just
pretty, but they know who they are. Their front seven is solid. They can run the ball, and they find ways to win. Like, they shouldn't have won that TCU game, but they found a way to win. And their only loss is Penn State.
That's formidable, you know.
Yeah, like
I don't know, freaking West Virginia.
Neil Brown went from the hot seat to whatever he's on now. Like, he's riding high.
Well, all right, so what does West Virginia finish with?
They're probably 7-5, but like the Big 12 is the worst Power 5 conference.
I mean, they got Houston next week. I think they could
probably a dub,
possibly win that. Oklahoma State, that's a flip of a coin because we don't know what version of Oklahoma State we're ever going to get ever. UCF, they could win that one.
If John Reese Plumlee's back, I think UCF wins that game.
BYU,
they can win that game.
They can win that, and then you got Oklahoma.
They're not winning that game.
And then you finish with Cincinnati and Baylor. I think they can win both of those.
That's what's crazy. Imagine if Neil Brown goes 9-3. Extend him. Time to extend him.
That's wild to me.
Okay, true or false? Big 12 is the worst Power 5 conference.
I was just about to say that. I agree with you. It's Texas not what I thought it would be.
There's a bigger gap between Texas and Oklahoma and the rest of the Big 12, maybe than what we were just talking about with the Big 10.
Yeah.
I still got respect for Kansas State. I'll say that. I still think they're a good team.
I mean, who's the argument here between the Big 12 and what maybe the ACC? I don't know. Maybe the SEC. I mean, the SEC looks rough.
Yeah, maybe the Big 10, because after those top 3, it's bad.
Yeah.
And I guess it's good that you have those top 3, but it's so bad. Like, it's really bad after that. But we got to get to the SEC. We did talk Georgia, Auburn, and LSU Ole Miss. Give me your thoughts on Alabama's performance. Obviously, like, beat Mississippi State. We know Mississippi State's not great, but, just thoughts from the game heading into A&M this week.
I still feel good. Like, I'm slowly, week by week, gaining a little bit more confidence in this team. I mean, listen, we scored 31 points in the first half of the game, and Jalen Milroe didn't throw a single pass until midway through the second quarter. That's impressive to me. I mean, it's really gonna come down to play calling. This team reminds me very much so of the Jalen Hurts Alabama teams. If y'all don't remember that, every week, speaking as an Alabama fan, every week we're walking away from, defense looks dominant, offense looks like they're struggling to move the ball, but we still win pretty handedly. That's how our season is looking right now, and Jalen Hurts took us to 2 national championships, winning games that way. We slowly got to start gaining confidence in the passing game. We're going to have to air it out. I think against A&M, we see them try to put Milroe in a spot to air the ball out. But this defense, I love what they're doing. They're playing around. They're flying. You got Caleb Downs coming into his own. We got 2 guys off the edge. We got Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell that are just wreaking havoc all season long. I love what our linebacker core is doing. Our running attack, I think Jace McClellan's really coming into his own. He's a phenomenal player. And even then, we saw flashes of Justice Haynes in this game. I still think he can be a solidified number 2 running back by the end of the season. No discredit to Roydell Williams, but the offensive line, I think that was the biggest takeaway from this game. The offensive line looked a lot better. And rightfully so, this offensive line should not have any hiccups whatsoever. They got the talent across the board. They got size across the board. They got to gradually start playing better, and then we can start trusting Jalen Milroe to drop back into passing games. But overall, I mean, we beat Mississippi State 40-17. I don't think Mississippi State's too good at all, really. But I walk away from that feeling a lot more confident than I felt last week.
It's better than an ugly win. It was better than how you played against USF. So, you summed it up perfectly. I don't really have much more to add. I'm anxious to see them against A&M this week. Best team they played since. Well, A&M's probably better than Ole Miss, but Kentucky, very good performance this week.
And we were just talking about we were just asking each other last week who is the threat in the SEC East, and I think we found it.
It's either them or Missouri. I'm still the passing game just leaves a lot to be desired for me. Like, Devin Leary is not like, when you run the ball that well, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe they can run it against Georgia, seeing how Georgia couldn't stop Auburn. But I still think Devin Leary is going to – if they want any hope of upsetting Georgia this weekend, he's going to have to throw the ball around. But they played really well this past weekend. Mark Stoops is just a good coach. Like,
he's a great coach.
Florida has dominated Kentucky pretty much all my life. He shows up and put an end to all that. Like he always beats Florida now.
Yep.
It's just when Florida, if they have to play off script, they can't. Like their quarterback is limited, and they know it. Their defense is good, not great, and their receivers outside of Pearsall are just they're passing attack. They're just not explosive on offense at all.
Yeah.
When they play like how they played against Tennessee, when they can force turnovers, play good defense, and run the ball, Florida's fine. When you get them down or get them off script, it's trouble. That is all you can say about them. A&M, Max Johnson got a win over Arkansas. I'll say this: I watched that game. It's not as close as 12 points. It was kind of like Texas in a way. Like Texas should have. Like you look at the yards and you look at the stats and everything. Like they should have won bigger. A&M should have won by a lot more than they did against Arkansas. They kind of dominated that game.
Yeah.
Missouri took care of business. Tennessee, I thought Tennessee's defense looked pretty good against South Carolina. I know they can't block, but like I'm saying, I'm also comparing them from typical Josh Heupel defenses and what we saw last year. I do think their defense is better. Like, but they're going to.
I think it's to the point where Spencer Rattler, and we've been saying all season, Spencer Rattler doesn't have any weapons in that passing game. I mean, I think Spencer Rattler is actually playing pretty well this year. He just doesn't have a lot of help. I've seen him develop a lot better than what he was last year or the year before that. But yeah, South Carolina, they're just not very good across the board. But Tennessee, they definitely had this game circled on their schedule. They came out, handled their business. I mean, that's what you want to see from Tennessee because we had hopes that Tennessee would be the second best team in the East. I think they kind of got to earn that title back. But with that being said, Joe Milton and the gang, they handled business.
Yep. They'll have bigger tests ahead. They got A&M in a couple weeks and then, of course, Alabama. So we'll see. But good win for Tennessee. All right, let's finish up with the Pac-12. They actually didn't have a lot of games this week, and we already discussed one of them. But how about those Beavers Friday night? They rebounded from the loss to Washington State.
They pulled it out, man.
I know Cam Rising didn't play. That they look pretty good. They got Cal this weekend. They should be 5-1 before you hit the back half of that schedule. Beavers are still a good team, and they're still a threat to Pac-12.
I'm just still not seeing the development I want from DJ Uiagalelei. Like,
True.
I wanted him to be so good at Oregon State, but I'm just not seeing it. I think I don't know what it is.
Like I think you have to, he can be useful, especially in the run game. He's been useful this year. When he is on target and in rhythm, he can be a good player. You can't ask him to go win games.
Yeah.
Like that, you just can't. But yeah, it was good to see our Beavers win. The Jayhawks couldn't get it done for us this week, but Oregon State did. Yeah. Cal beat Arizona State. I'm sure you were thrilled about that. Washington, they kind of looked mid for the first time this year. They struggled a little bit. No. As good as they've looked through the first few games, look, there's been a struggling performance for every single team that we're considered among the elite. Like Texas barely beating Wyoming and struggling with Rice through the first few games. Georgia struggling against Auburn and South Carolina. Michigan, not really struggling, just on cruise control, basically. Oregon was down to Texas Tech at the beginning of that game. USC can't defend anyone. I'm a little worried about Washington's defense. Maybe it's a little worse than I thought. Maybe. I still think that maybe they were holding back possibly a little bit because they got a bye week and then they got it's a rivalry game. It's a massive game in Seattle against Oregon. I can't wait for that one in a couple weeks, but not concerned. But I wish they'd have played better.
Yeah, I mean, everybody you had on the team, I mean, Michael Penix, he went 30 for 40 with over 350 yards. He didn't have any passing touchdowns, but either way, he can still move the ball up and down the field at will. And then you got the running attack involved. You had 4 rushing touchdowns in the game. I think I'm not going to sit here and discredit Washington by any means. I think this was just a hiccup. I think they're looking ahead. That's all it was. Just win this game and get out of there, you know?
When you start having multiple hiccups in a row, that's my concern.
Yes.
When you've been dominant and generally even some of the best teams we've ever seen have a hiccup or two, like 2020 Alabama against Ole Miss, you allow a bunch of points and had to go back and forth that game. You have some hiccups. So, I'm not super concerned. Oregon took care of business against Stanford. It kind of got a little dicey early. I think Stanford took the lead early, and I'm like, No, come on now. And Oregon handled business. They're also off. So we're going to have undefeated Oregon, undefeated Washington, and Seattle. But just a couple minutes here. I think we're at the point in the season now. We wanted to wait a little bit. Now let's pick our top 4 based on solely what's happened this year. I'll start it off. I would put, and this is just who the 4 best teams I think right now. I think I would still have Washington 1. I would have Texas number 2. I would have Florida State number 3. I don't think Florida State's – I think there are some teams that are better, but you have to give them credit for the wins that they do have. They have a pair of wins that are as good as anybody in the country. I think the scary thing for Florida State might be that LSU and Clemson both have 2 losses. Yeah. If they finish 8-4, or maybe
those wins aren't looking as good as you think.
That's what I'm saying. Like, you're gonna get to the point where maybe we got to go undefeated, or maybe they still got some big games left. They got Duke. They might not have Riley Leonard, so that might look worse. And they still got Miami towards the end of the year. So I would have Florida State number 3. And I debated on it who to put number 4. I'm gonna put Ohio State number 4. I think the win over Notre Dame should count. I know they haven't been the most crisp, but that would be my top 4 right now. I would leave Georgia and Michigan out. I think those are still – and Penn State out for that matter. I still think those are 3 of the most talented teams and some of the best teams. They're just not playing consistently, and their schedule hasn't been as tough. So my top 4 will be Washington, Texas, Florida State, and Ohio State.
Yeah, I think we got the same list, except I'm swapping the top 2. Give me Texas at number 1. I love what Texas is doing. They got the big win at Bama. They just laid the smackdown on Kansas. I think the way their defense is playing, they're picking up their running game a lot, and they still have that passing attack with Quinn Ewers and the boys. I like Texas at number 1. Give me Washington at number 2. I'm not going to hold this game against them, this game against Arizona against them. They're still playing phenomenal. They still have one of, if not the best passing attack in all of college football. Give me Florida State. I need to see Florida State come out and be a little bit more dominant. I think the hardest team you got left on your schedule is going to end up being Miami, but you got to handle business the rest of the way. I think they match up well against everybody they play. And then at that 4th spot, I like Ohio State. I wanted to put Michigan there, but like you said, that Notre Dame win has to hold a little bit of weight. Michigan just hasn't played anybody. I like Ohio State right there at that 4th spot.
If they played tomorrow, I'd pick Michigan for the record. I would. But I just – come on. That schedule's terrible. Hey, their schedule may have got a boost this past weekend. Bowling Green, they beat Bowling Green. You know who didn't? Georgia Tech. So that's going to wrap it up for today's show. Be sure, if you're watching this on YouTube, like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell so you know when our content goes live. If you're listening on podcast form, if you think we deserve 1 star, look, so be it. If you're whatever fan out there, if you're an LSU fan out there that's listening, you might think we deserve 1 star. If you're an Oregon State fan, we should get it 5 stars every single time based on the past 2 seasons. So be sure to do that. We'll be sitting here for our Week 6 recap next week, but that's going to do it for us. You got anything else, Kobe?
No, let's have another great week of college football. We got some exciting games. Be sure to tune in, check all the socials, and make sure you're listening. If you're listening on podcasts, you're listening live on YouTube or Facebook, just be sure you're tuning in. We're going to be putting up as much content as we can.
Absolutely, man. That's going to do it for me. That is Kobe Reed. This is Jackson Caudill.